Welcome to another episode of Beyond Reform, where we dive into the changes, challenges, and triumphs in Jamaica's public sector transformation journey. If you've missed any of our previous episodes, as always, you can catch up on our website at publicsectortransformation.gov.jm. I'm your host, Aniki Clark. Productivity, productivity, productivity. It is the buzzword of the year, especially in light of the new public sector compensation system. In fact, many are asking, will we now see greater levels of productivity in the public sector? Some are even demanding that the government put strategies in place to drive and incentivize productivity in the public sector. But is it just a public sector problem? Well, we're thrilled to have with us today two distinguished experts to discuss productivity in the public sector. We have retired Professor Andrew Downs, a renowned academic in productivity, and Mrs. Tamar Nelson, Chief Technical Director at the Jamaica Productivity Centre in the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Aniki, for having me.
Thank you very much.
So let's start with you, Professor Downs. You know, people have been hearing, certainly in the recent time, in the past 12 months or so, greater emphasis being placed on productivity. And some may not be too sure what this really means. Can you share with our listeners a basic definition of what we mean when we say productivity and explain why it is so important in the world of work?
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad that Jamaica is seeing productivity again as an important issue for consideration. I use a simple and basic definition of productivity, and simply put, we are looking at the extent to which the output of goods and services that are of a certain quality, usually, are produced, that is, this output is produced by various organizations using a set of inputs, whether they be labor services, the services of machinery and equipment, energy, raw materials, and so forth. It is usually expressed as a ratio, meaning, therefore, that we're looking at the amount of output per unit of the resources that we're going to use. So, for example, then, we can talk about a person in 5 hours producing, and that could be 5 man-hours, which is the input, producing 10 chairs, which is the output. So, when we talk about productivity, then, we're talking about a relationship between the output of goods and services and the inputs that are used to produce those goods and services. It is part of a broader concept of the performance of an organization or a country, as the case may be. So in some instances, you might find that people might focus more on the overall performance of the organization rather than the narrow concept of productivity. And there are several reasons for that, which we hope to discuss as the discussion continues. In terms of the how we measure it, we talk sometimes about single factor productivity. For example, the most common one that people tend to talk about is labor productivity. And here we are talking about the amount of output produced by the amount of labor services or man-hours or number of persons in the production process, or energy productivity. And in more broad terms, we might want to combine those inputs into one. And we can talk about multi-factor productivity or total productivity, which says, therefore, how output increases in relation or changes in relation to the whole combination of inputs that are being used. One last point I want to mention, however, which I think is important from the public sector perspective especially, is that productivity is also linked to the whole issue of effectiveness and efficiency, where effectiveness speaks about the ability to achieve a particular output target. That is, you set yourself a target and you seek to achieve that particular target. And efficiency, which talks about the minimum resources that one will want to expend in order to produce that particular output. So another way of looking at productivity is in terms of the effective and efficient use of resources, that is capital labor, machinery, and so forth, in the production and supply of quality goods and services. So that's another way of looking at it. So we can have a very narrow definition, which is basically the amount of output that's produced for given units of inputs, or we can speak about it from the point of view of the effectiveness relative to the efficiency that takes place within an organization.
All right, so just for our listeners, we're going to focus on the latter around focusing on efficiency and effectiveness in the world of work. So undoubtedly, productivity is very important for growth and development. So how does Jamaica's productivity compare to other countries in the Caribbean?
Well, that's an interesting question. The problem we have is that not many countries in the region have tracked productivity in the usual sense that we do it. I've been able to look at some statistics for Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad and Tobago with respect to the total productivity that we talk about, where we're talking about the output of the country relative to the combination of inputs that we use. And over the last 20 years or so, we've seen in all three countries, Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago, either a general decline in total productivity or some stagnation, that is hardly any movement in the level of total productivity in the countries. And there isn't much change in relation to labor productivity if you want to go that particular route. Interesting enough, Jamaica has seen a very modest, very modest, almost insignificant to some extent, increase in productivity in the last 5 to 10 years. And that is reflected in a number of things, number of initiatives that seem to have been undertaken to improve the ease of doing business in Jamaica. And it is shown that Jamaica has done probably the best of all the Caribbean countries over the last decade or so. So in a sense, then, Jamaica has, like all the other Caribbean countries, been experiencing a general decline over a couple, 4 or 5 decades. But there's been a small incremental increase in recent times, nothing much to shout about. So there's a big challenge in relation to trying to get productivity, whether it's total productivity or labor productivity, up in all the countries in the region.
Are there different ways of measuring total productivity, for example, in the private sector compared to the public sector?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's a challenge. The public sector one, and I can speak from my experience since I was chairman of the National Productivity Council in Barbados when we first set it up back in the late 90s. And the measure of productivity as we have defined it can be challenging in the public sector. The private sector, it is in most cases, we can use information from financial statements and administrative records to get a sense of productivity, in the sense that most private sector businesses produce financial statements where you can get a sense of output or sales revenue or some factor like that. And you can, get a sense of the number of persons employed and get a rough indicator of the productivity in the private sector. So, of course, that doesn't mean that there are no challenges at all in the private sector. There are in many cases. And a lot of it has to do with responses of many of these private sector companies, and more specifically in the services sector. In the public sector, however, that has always been when I did office as chairman of the Productivity Council, that was my biggest disappointment, that we didn't get up to the back of that one. But the challenge is that the public sector, there are some areas where you can make headway in relation to productivity measurement, which are very similar to those in the private sector. So very similar to those in the private sector, we can make some headway in terms of measurement. But in many cases, there are several areas where you cannot, and therefore you'll find that in the public sector, we tend to use the broader indicator of performance. So you would talk about response time, for example. How does a particular department in government respond to certain requests that are made, certain applications that are applied, because these are all important elements that affect the private sector. The completion rate, have they been able to complete the thing within a certain time? So you have situations where we use what we call a family of measures approach to productivity measurement, a family of measures approach to productivity when we are when we're looking at the public sector, especially in those areas where it's not easy to pin down the actual output as such. So that has been a challenge, but some countries have been able to develop fairly useful indicators of performance or productivity in the public sector. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying, therefore, where the financial information and administrative records and certain types of elements of the productivity equation are available, we can use that in either the public or private sector. But in the public sector, there are specific challenges associated with the measurement of output that really we have to reconsider. And therefore, one can use a family of measures approach. There's also another approach that is a little more sophisticated that we tried in Barbados, and that is a work measurement approach. But that is very involved in terms of trying to work out how long it takes to do certain things and so forth and so on. So there's some differences in terms of measuring productivity in the private sector versus the public, but where in the public sector there are organizations that fit or look like private sector or operate like private sector organizations, you can measure it in a similar way.
Okay, thank you so much. And I want to bring in Tamar at this point, because you're leading the charge at the Jamaica Productivity Centre, and it's important to understand your role and what you do in that regard. So please share with our listeners an overview of the centre.
Thank you, Aniki. But I would just want to start with something to follow on what Prof just said as it relates to the definition of productivity. Now, he would have mentioned the mathematical and the economic definitions of productivity, and also that it's both being efficient and effective. I want to also bring in a philosophical definition of productivity, one that I love, one that was coined in 1959. And it goes like this. Productivity is above all a state of mind. It is an attitude that seeks the continuous improvement of what exists. It is a conviction that you can do better today than yesterday, and that tomorrow will be better than today. Furthermore, it requires constant efforts to adapt economic activities to ever-changing conditions and the application of new theories and methods. It is the belief in the progress of humanity, right? So I will now segue into what we do because it's closely related to this. As the National Productivity Organization, we are here to help to facilitate productivity growth. And based on the definition I just said, it's a multi-pronged approach that will be needed. And of course, even more important is that mindsets will have to change. So the whole culture of productivity, how we think about it, how it affects our beliefs and our actions, and that it requires constant efforts. So we have a team at the JPC where we achieve the mandate through consultancy. We have a technical team that goes out and helps organizations in terms of looking at the gaps, finding out what their pain points are and helping them to solve those problems, to close those gaps, giving the recommendations or capacity building that's needed in that regard. We also are big...
Sorry, you mentioned a team. Is this an army or a handful of people?
A team of 10.
Okay.
We're little, but we're talawa.
Okay.
So we're talking about a small team of persons with a very huge mandate, right? So we have to be very creative in terms of how we go about doing that. And so when we go into organizations, what we try to do is to share that information. So the education and the public awareness is also important in terms of what we have done, what our organizations done to improve their productivity and for others to see that this is something that I can do. It's not rocket science. Well, if they can do it, I can do it too. right? So, we try to sensitize, to share that information so we can replicate the information. Measurement is the foundation of it all, right? And without what the saying goes,
You can't measure.
you can't improve what you can't measure.
Right.
There you go, right? So the measurement is foundational, and culturally, we tend to shy away from measuring for various reasons. But that's where the key is, because that's how we're going to not base the improvements on gut feeling, but to, have the improvements where it counts. Because when you think about productivity, it could be, you could be looking at quality, it could be process, it could be systems, or it could be, your equipment, it could be your staffing. So various things can affect productivity, and even some external to an organization or entity. So it's important that you focus on the ones that can give you the biggest impact.
Maximum return.
Right.
Yes.
So it may be a good thing that you're working on, but is it the right thing? That's how measurement comes in. So we need the measurements on a national level, on an industry or sector level, and also at the firm level. And then within organizations, you're going down to even at the individual levels, right? Because everything contributes and everyone contributes. That productivity is one of those things. As we say at JPC, it's everybody's business. So our stakeholders include everyone, really. So whether they are in school or not, whether they're in the workforce or not, at the policy level, private or public, all contributes to Jamaica's productivity. So we have that multi-pronged approach going out to help Jamaica to improve. And you'd have seen that we signed a partnership with the JMEA.
That's the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association, for those who don't know the acronym.
Yes, thank you for that. Yes, we would have joined forces and formalized our decades-long partnership with a memorandum of understanding to really see how we can improve that particular sector. And, that whole act of signing is not just a symbolic thing, but it goes beyond the signing, because when it comes to productivity, because of the magnitude of what we're looking at, it's a whole elephant. And they say if you want to eat an elephant, you have to take one bite at a time.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And a small team of 10, we can't do it alone. So it's through those partnerships that we have that shared goal and vision and pulling in the same direction towards an improved Jamaica. So, we need more partners on board. We need everyone on board as it relates to public sector productivity improvement, private sector productivity improvement.
But are you doing anything specific for the public sector?
I think Prof was saying that, that was one of his regrets while he was at the NPO in Barbados. And I can just tell you that I was on a call with the ILO just last week, where we organized all of the productivity centers in the region to have a sharing exercise, and we spoke on measurement to see how we can improve on measurement of productivity in the region. And the topic of public sector productivity came up, and those within and outside the region concur that is one of the hardest things to improve is public sector productivity. So it's not just a Jamaica thing, it's a worldwide thing, right? Because of the nature of the beast.
Why is it so challenging, though?
For various reasons. It could be, there are many limiting factors as it relates to public sector productivity improvement. There are financial constraints, for example, with budget cuts and slashes. There is the debt issue. There may be human resource constraints, staffing. We are having a lot of migrations, for example, lots of shifts within sectors, right, happening, limited skills and access to training. Well, I know TIU is doing a wonderful job of giving us access to tools and courses online. But, there are some areas that possibly still need some some work. And of course, the bureaucracies that causes inefficiencies and blocks. It could be the whole matter of silo mentality. Prof spoke about turnaround times. We are probably seeing in that particular sector a slowness in the adoption of technology and digitalization, for example. So the factors are numerous and to different degrees for various entities and countries, and these are all blocks. There's also corruption, sometimes social impacts that can affect and environmental impacts as well. So it's not a simple thing, and we can't approach it simplistically, right? So it is a challenge, but it doesn't mean that we can't improve on it. In fact, these challenges can be seen as opportunities, right? And going back to the phrase I said before with the elephant, we have to take it one bite at a time. So what we have done at the Jamaica Productivity Centre is we have, used different strategies over the years to improve public sector efficiencies. So one of the things we have looked at, for example, is how can we reduce the cost of inputs, right? So if we are looking at the mathematical definition of productivity of output over input, if we reduce the denominator, then productivity will increase. So, for example, we have done initiatives to help organizations, including our ministry, to reduce energy consumption. So we launched an energy campaign, did training, because we have energy managers on our team, and looked at, for example, other ways and competitions, and we got reductions in the electricity bills. Right. And then it transferred to water, and then we started to look at paper, right? And we saw that improvement happen, right? So that was one thing. Another thing that we do is we go in and look at the processes to see where are the bottlenecks, what can be removed, is there any duplication, is there any waste in the system, is there anything that we're doing that we shouldn't be doing, and how can we remove that, and is there any process that can be automated or digitalized. And we have done that and had significant success. So we have also done work in the public service in terms of improving on processes. So within our own Ministry of Labour and Social Security, we were able to analyze the work permit system and look at the process and make recommendations for improvement. And through that baseline study and through the TIU, we were able to get grant funding to digitalize that process, and that process is near to completion today. So we're very happy about that initiative. One thing we also note is that when it comes to productivity, one size doesn't fit all. So even if the methods are similar, you might have to tweak it based on who you're dealing with, because every organization have the little DNA on print. But one thing is for sure, especially for Jamaicans, we love competitions, right? We like to compete. And so last year we were able to launch our first public sector productivity and innovation competition. And it got a lot of good feedback. The entities that participated were just phenomenal in terms of the work that they are doing. And so what we want to do is to expand that some more and have more companies and entities and organizations involved so that they can see that this is something that we can do. And this is something that will not only benefit the organization or my team members, it will benefit me as well, right? And it's a win-win. So those are just some of the ways and initiatives that we have been using, different ways and initiatives to get persons to see that, productivity is the way to go, and that we all benefit from, we all win from improving productivity.
Great, great. And I want to scale up that and draw in Professor Downs here, because Tamar would have mentioned some of the strategies that they've employed to incentivize productivity. But in your own research, have you found particular strategies? She did say it's not a one-size-fits-all, and we appreciate that. But what are some of the most effective strategies that have been used to enhance employee productivity?
Well, let me first of all go back to something Tamara said, and I compliment her for that one. In terms of the public sector, one of the initiatives that the Barbados government has implemented, although it doesn't have a productivity center or council anymore, but what they have scaled it up by incorporating awards at the national level. When the Independence Awards, national awards are being offered to usually individuals and so forth. This current government has added to that those awards, national awards, awards for public sector agencies that have done very well in terms of their productivity. So we've had situations like an immigration department, which was in the past, a place you try to avoid. Now they've developed to such an extent that they won the very first award for the improvements in the operations, the productivity, and overall performance, so that you can be guaranteed that if they say that you get back your passport in 2 days, it's 2 days you'll get it back. So they have developed systems and measures to be able to improve the processes that take place within the public sector. So and in recent times, I think this year's awardee, I think there was the land registry, I think it was. And they won out because of the digitization of the records within the land registry. So we are seeing some movement in the area of government when it comes to selected departments. And I think, as Tamara has indicated, it is you're one step at a time. And if you highlight these particular organizations that are doing well, the others will follow. It's like a herding effect, so to speak. So in terms of employee productivity in particular, I mean, Jamaica has been very interesting. I remember years ago doing a study on Jamaica productivity, but I did about 2 or 3 studies on Jamaican productivity. And there was a famous book, I'm trying to remember the title of it, Why Workers Don't Like to Work or something along those lines.
Why Workers Don't Work.
Right, don't work. Right, that's the classic book. It still is classic. God, yes, and I don't think things have changed dramatically over the years. But I think the first thing I would put down is that in terms of what motivates persons would be recognition for work. I mean, I've done some surveys for different presentations I've made and so on, and when you ask them what motivates you to be much more productive, the first thing that most people put at the top of the list is recognition for work undertaken and done. That is, people like to know that they're recognized and that for something they've done. And I think that's important, that organizations must have a recognition system which allows employees to have a voice and also to be recognized for the work that they're doing. Secondly, I think the need to improve the management, supervisory management and leadership style to be much more inclusive. In Jamaica, and going back to Tamara's philosophical definition, if I will link that further to the social and cultural. There is a social divide that exists in Jamaica, I have found over the years, that that separates workers from leaders, from managers. And when you have that sort of exclusive management style in place, you get very little done because there's always suspicions and they're getting the money and I'm not getting any and so forth. Those are the sort of things that you don't want to encourage. So I would think to improve productivity in the organizations from the employee side, you need to have improved supervisory management and a leadership style that is inclusive and allow persons who know the nitty-gritty of things to give them a say and don't come from the top, a sort of top-down type approach. The other one I would include would be the streamlining. I think Tamar spoke about this in terms of the public sector. Streamlining operation processes in organizations. You have situations where, there are frustrations, people, especially in government, a file has to go from one ministry to the next ministry to do certain things, or sometimes people are not clear who is supposed to do what for certain things. So you have to have systems and processes which allow the smooth um, process, the smooth operation to take place without the stumbling blocks that you have. So I think streamlining operation processes is something I would add to increasing employee productivity. And the last one, of course, the ones you don't forget, is that you have to remunerate or compensate the persons working in the public sector appropriately. Right? That is, they must see that is that whilst they will say yes, you're being recognized. You can't take recognition solely to the supermarket, and therefore you want to be able to say, "But look, in addition to being recognized for doing the job, I'm also being adequately remunerated." And this is where you would engage in various types of job evaluation exercises to ensure that there's comparability between different organizations, different departments within government, and also between government and the private sector, so that people will not think that they're being unfair. And the reason for this is that Jamaica has experienced over the years a serious migration of a lot of its skilled persons. Especially to North America, and clearly what you want to, and getting them back is going to be very difficult if you're going to use this compensation alone. But they might be socially connected to Jamaica and therefore want to come back and help in many regards. So I think what we're looking in organizations to have is really for people to have decent, productive, and sustainable work. Once that's a focus, and that they have a voice in terms of how things are done in the organization. So I think in those ways, I think we can increase worker or labor productivity. Of course, the final point I want to add there is that there are always complementary inputs that need to be put in place. You can train the people, but when they come back to your organization, to have an old machine to work with and not the new machine. So clearly what you want to do is to make sure that the complementary factors of production are there to allow persons to do the work in the way in which they should be at maximum efficiency or maximum productivity.
And let's talk a little bit about the complementary factors, because persons tend to point that, it takes me so long to get to work. I come and, I'm not in the best mindset because I've had to fight with the traffic. And so how does that impact productivity overall?
Well, for me, it does for sure. I mean, as I said, it's a mindset. Productivity in some organizations has to do with the mindset. When you land at the office and somebody affects you on the road, or you're late, or you're anxious, and so forth, all these things affect. I think what we haven't done much of in the region is to look at the whole question of labor market flexibility. And even within organizations, we have to think. We have systems which say that everyone must get to work at 8 o'clock, and everyone should be leaving work about 4:30 or 5 or whatever time it is. Not recognizing that you people can differ during the day, and even on some their days themselves, in the attitude towards working. Some people prefer to work much more productively in the afternoon than in the morning. And the questions, can we accommodate that sort of structure in place? So going back to Tamara's first point, it is a whole country social change that has, or transformation as the project indicates, and that needs to be taking place, where organizations can engage in some degree of flexibility in the use of labor over time, then they should adopt that particular approach. And therefore that will allow situations outside of the workforce, outside of the organization, to be considered in terms of collecting kids from school in the afternoon, dropping off kids to school. Everybody's on the road at the same time. And that certainly is not going to be conducive to adequate productivity taking place.
Great. And as from the perspective of the employee, Tamar, what role do they play in moving the needle in the right direction?
Well, I always say this, that people are the core of productivity and productivity improvement, right? The biggest asset in any organization is the people. So even with the latest technology, the latest AI tools, the latest machinery, you will need people to effectively and efficiently use those equipment to achieve your objective. And so the employees play a very, very critical role in terms of productivity improvement. They can make or break a system. And so when it comes to improving productivity, I mentioned data and the importance of data. The other thing I would add to that is dialogue, right? So Prof just mentioned the disconnect between leadership and the rest of the team. That cannot be if you want to improve productivity, right? There needs to be synergies. There needs to be dialogue and communication to ensure that we're working on the right things. One of the things during my training in Japan in productivity improvement, a phrase that they would always use is that you need to go to Genba, right? That's a Japanese term, which means shop floor or where the tire meets the road. So you need to actually talk to the people who are dealing with your customers, right? And that dialogue with the customers is also important as well. They are part of your people, so to speak. So that feedback into the system is important, especially for public sector entities. So, between who we serve and who is serving them, that dialogue and feedback needs to continue. And if possible, to document those issues, problems, and see them as opportunities. Deal with them in the shortest possible time, and we'll see significant improvements just from that, for example, right? Another thing that we can do as individuals is standardizing what we do. So, with the massive changes in people migrating from, to overseas, to different sectors, what I see missing is those standard operating procedures within our teams. So when somebody leaves, that knowledge goes away, right? So we need to document, what it is that we need to do. When somebody comes in, this is how we do it, so that it's standard right across the board. So you don't do it better than me.
So it doesn't matter, right?
It doesn't matter who is there, right? And then if you are not here, Aniki, I can fill in for you because I know the procedure and I can follow that, right? But having a procedure that is not a static document. So it shouldn't be last updated
2019, for argument's sake.
For example, right? Yes. And I always say to our clients, if you're doing the same thing you were doing in 2019 or even last year, you're doing the wrong thing, right? So we need to be updating how we are approaching what we're doing because the environment is changing every day, right? So as individuals, I believe too, if we can have that commitment to being even 1% better every day, to say, what can I change? What can I improve? What could make my life a lot easier? What can I do today that will make my job better today than it was yesterday? What can I do today that would make my job tomorrow better than today? Right? And it would make our lives easier. Then we will be in a better frame of mind when we're driving home. Yes. To be with our family and have better work-life balance, for example. And that 1% per day, it has a compound effect.
Yes.
And by the end of the year, you know that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
By the end of the year, you're looking at, if you improve 1% every day, by the end of the year, you're looking at not 1x or 2x or 10x, it's 37 times in terms of improvement. And then if you have a team of persons, if everybody, say each week, come up with one thing that they are going to improve on, so you have 10 people. That's 10 improvements each week. If you have 100 people, that's 100 improvements each week. So, and it would compound every week, to the end of the year.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge is that people look at productivity as this grand thing and not, the individual responsibilities.
No. And then we have to set aside time for it, right? So that we can come out of that firefighting mode. Because oftentimes we are just in the run of the, yes, we're on the treadmill, we're on the wheel and we're just spinning. But we have to step back, look at the big picture and spend times on the things that are most important, those big rocks. And just a little each day, that 1% can have a big impact. So if each of us as individuals can commit to ourselves to be 1% every day, I think we can see a better Jamaica by next year.
Oh, awesome. And my final question is to you, Professor Down. So if, not that I'm, setting up a political situation here, but if you were to advise the government of Jamaica on measures that they should focus on in the next 10 to 15 years to really drive productivity in the public sector, what would be your top 3 areas?
That's always difficult, but as I said, we have to take it. Let me go back to one small point, however, in relation to Tamara's thing about. I think what we want to also do is to see the extent to which productivity affects the individual in the organization. I mean, we have to probably do a little more work in that area, in the sense that certainly it can drive down inflation in some cases, improve compensation and that sort of thing. So that's a general point I want to make, because people will ask, well, what is in this for me? Right? That's usually the question that I want me to increase my productivity, but I mean, I'm doing something, but I'm confident over what I'm doing at this point in time, and therefore, why should I do more? And I guess it's important to be able to say, well, look, these are the benefits of increasing productivity at the individual level, at the organizational level, and even at the country level. So I think it's important to see productivity at those 3 levels in that thing. So in terms of the government and what the government can do, I think the first thing I would put on the table is a broad area of human resource development. Incentives and this has to do with the education, especially the training and skill development side of things. I think that is probably, and this is for government's ability to do it. I mean, of course, there are other things that the private sector would need to do, but from the government, is really to ensure that the institutions that are there to produce persons with the necessary skills, education, and competencies that will allow the labor market to meet its needs when we're talking about. Because one of the problems you have is that affects productivity is a skill gap. We haven't spoken about that, but the skill gap certainly can create problems for productivity at the macro level in organizations. The second one I would think would be investment in incentives to get investment going in research and development and innovation. I think there are a number of systems in the public sector that certainly need to be changed, and also in the private sector. And I think insofar that government can provide incentives to greater investment in the area of research and development innovation, which is linked to the human resource development process, because they're not separate and distinct. You want to be able to link the whole question of R&D and innovation to human resource development. I think that is the second one I put in there. And the third one I would think is to generally improving the business and regulatory climate in Jamaica. I think, as I said, Jamaica has suffered from issues in relation to crime and violence, access to finance for small and micro enterprises. There's some logistic issues and so forth. And the question arises, how can we remove these blockages to production and productivity in the economy? And I think certainly if the government can review its operations insofar as that it interface with the private sector and remove those particular regulatory blockages, we should be able to get a good movement in that. I think all this is related, and Jamaica has, I'm not sure the extent to which there has been any evaluation or monitoring of the Vision 2030 plan for Jamaica, which speaks about the labor market and productivity. But it'd be good to, if you haven't, and tomorrow you can probably speak to this better than I can, to be able to see, to going back to that particular plan document, to see in actual fact what has been achieved so far and what needs to be achieved as important to going forward. Because I think what we tend to do, we talk a lot but do very little. And it's important that when we prepare documents seeing the future down the road, we want to be able to monitor and evaluate what it is that we've been able to do going forward. So I would think as a footnote, so to speak, to the thing, that the government should also evaluate its performance with respect to the labor market and productivity component of Vision 2030, and be able to put in place new measures or changes or tweaking the particular plan and such that that by 2030 we will have something meaningful to say about how productivity has changed in Jamaica.
And that's it for today's episode of Beyond Reform and this season. Thank you so much to our loyal listeners who have stayed with us for the entire season. A huge thanks to Professor Andrew Downs and Mrs. Tamar Nelson for helping to demystify the concept of productivity. As always, I'm reminding you that you can listen to this episode and others on our website at publicsectortransformation.gov.jm or search Public Sector Transformation Jamaica wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much and see you next season.